Welcome to the next leg in our adventure through the central area of New South Wales. In this episode, Rick and I join the Cobb Highway at Mosgiel and make our way to Ivanhoe, and then on to Clare Sports Reserve where we camped overnight. From Clare we made our way to Balranald on the Murrumbidgee River, where we then explored the town's most significant points of interest and spent time visiting Yanga Woolshed. On joining the Cobb Highway at Mosgiel, the highway left a lot to be desired as far as highways go. The gravel road to Mosgiel had been much smoother and in better condition than the Cobb Highway, which had seen extensive flood damage. The road had been subject to flooding earlier in the year and had left it with major woo-boys where the road had sunk, with some washed out sections as well. We travelled through open downs country covered in huge amounts of feed with patches of scalded country in between. We have seen very few emus or kangaroos on our travels, though this could be because of the wonderful season that the area was having. We saw so much feed and water around that I am sure that the wildlife was spread further afield than along the roadside, when there is usually green pig and runoff water from the road. Often the only features that stood out were windmills, earth dams and tanks. We did marvel at the ever-changing country though. I had not realised the extent of flooding that had occurred, but as we drove closer to Ivanhoe, I kept remarking on all the water that was lying around in the paddocks on both sides of the road. The amount of water was truly amazing. Little was I to know just how much water there was. As we came closer to Ivanhoe, the vast expanse of water just kept going. What we were seeing was astonishing. Ivanhoe on the Cobb Highway was founded in the early 1860s and was named after Sir Walter Scott's work of historical fiction, Ivanhoe. It is said to have been born through hard work and determination and represents the classic outback pastoral town through tough times and good, floods and crippling droughts. Ivanhoe functions as a service centre for the surrounding area and is situated on well-used coach and stock routes connecting Wilcannia on the Darling River with Balranald on the Murrumbidgee and Boolagul on the Lachlan. On arriving in Ivanhoe, we were to learn that the area had been subject to major flooding in January that saw some graziers stranded for weeks and weeks, and with some graziers southwest of Ivanhoe inundated by floodwaters for more than 12 months. In the park we were treated to the Pioneers mural, dedicated to the pioneers who settled Ivanhoe and its surrounds. These people have come to represent those outback characteristics that Australians use to define themselves: hard work, strength and humour. The district is still largely populated by the families of the original settlers who came seeking their fortune. As the demand for meat grew in the south, the area opened up, providing affordable land on which to graze sheep and cattle and grow crops. A number of the small communities were established in the region, supplying accommodation and goods for pioneers, Cobb & Co coaches, drovers, shearers and teamsters. The pioneers also had a close relationship with the local Indigenous people, using their knowledge of water sources and the environment to survive in the often harsh climate. The area was also serviced by travelling Chinese and Indian hawkers and Afghan camel trains, making it a truly multicultural centre. From as early as the 1840s, large sections of what is now the Cobb Highway was recognised as the best route for moving stock from Queensland and inland New South Wales to Victorian markets. Stories of travel and settlement along the Cobb Highway of days past have been captured in a route called the Long Paddock, a 610 kilometre section of the Cobb Highway from Echuca, Moama on the Murray River to Wilcannia. Rick and I had first come across the long paddock in Wilcannia during our Darling River trip. Unlike the early travellers and drovers that traversed the often harsh and unforgiving plains of the Riverina and southwest New South Wales, we now saw their world from the comfort of our air-conditioned vehicle. We measured our trip in hours rather than days, unlike the early travellers and drovers that traversed the often harsh and unforgiving plains. We marvelled at the hardship that these tough outback characters had to face each and every day to make a living in such a remote area of Australia. A hotel was built at Ivanhoe in 1871 called the Ivanhoe Hotel and ceased operating in 1882. While the post office opened on the 1st of January 1874 at Williamson's store, renamed the Post Office Store. In 1876, two new hotels opened at Ivanhoe, the Horse and Jockey licensee Duncan McGregor and Mac's Ivanhoe Hotel, and in 1879 a police presence was maintained at Ivanhoe to protect local residents from the Hatfield bushrangers. A telegraph station was opened in Ivanhoe in 1883, with the township being described as having about 50 residents, a blacksmith shop, two hotels, two stores, the Williamsons and the Stewarts, and a few cottages. In 1884, Ivanhoe was a major change station for Cobb & Co horses on the coach route. In 1925, Ivanhoe was linked by the Broken Hill railway line to Sydney via Parkes. 2 years later, the extension to Broken Hill was completed. The line through Ivanhoe later became part of the transcontinental east-west rail corridor connecting Sydney to Perth. Dust, flies, heat, grasshoppers, rabbits, there was a plague in 1890, snakes and drought have all been levelled at the district. But then, isn't that the essence of the outback? But flooding, that's another question. The area around Ivanhoe is said to be the flattest area in the southern hemisphere, with both the Lachlan and Darling river systems flowing through the area. With floodwaters from both catchment areas and persistent rain, the area had been transformed into an inland sea that was still impacting the community 6 months later. The vast expanse of water we saw was truly amazing, though I can only imagine what it had been like earlier in the year when the water was reportedly up to 100 kilometres wide, stretching from Boolagul on the Hay Plains to Ivanhoe. The bird life was incredible, but we only saw a fraction of what was there because of the vast spread of the water. Even some of the people we talked to had never seen so much water around Ivanhoe. As we made our way towards Clare, we were again very lucky to see the lakes with water in them. The flooding that had occurred earlier in the year was still impacting the area after 6 months. We marvelled at the sheer volume of water we saw. The flooding brought back memories of when we have had to deal with flooding and been stranded, but in comparison it was nothing like around Ivanhoe. The mammoth task of living and dealing with so much water and the incalculable damage and loss of livestock pastoralists have had to deal with cannot be put into words. All farmers, pastoralists and those living on the land rely on Mother Nature to provide rain, but to the extent these people have had in one season is hard to deal with. The native wildlife has also suffered, though the bird life was making the most of the situation. The lakes slowly disappeared and we were again treated to open downs country covered in plenty of feed. We mainly saw mobs of sheep and a few cattle, but in some places saw goats, but they were off the road away. As we drew closer to our overnight camp, the country began to change with a few trees instead of just open downs. I was surprised to see the road was all bitumen and in pretty good condition as well. There was little to no traffic until we got closer to our camp at Clare Sports Reserve. We were nearly to the halfway point between Ivanhoe and Balranald. Clare Sports Recreational Reserve was a welcome break from travelling. Rick and I enjoyed a peaceful, quiet afternoon, relaxing beside a fire that we made from a previous fire that was still smouldering under the ash. We had often seen the remains of fires that had been used by other campers and are often disappointed by how many are still warm from previous use. Since both of us have been brought up on the land, we are always conscious of fires and the destruction they can cause if left unattended. It was a beautiful evening and the sunrise the next morning was amazing. We left our camp at the sports reserve with the threat of rain. The clouds had made for a spectacular sunrise, and we dodged light showers on and off as we began this leg of our journey. Rick and I had really enjoyed this bush camp. The Ivanhoe Balranald road was just far enough away so as the trucks that drove past in the night did not disturb us. The sports reserve brought back memories of past horse sports and camp draft weekends we had attended in northwest Queensland and the Territory when the boys were little. It was nice to reminisce about the great times we had had and of all the wonderful people and places we had known. We continued our travels towards Balranald through flat, open, semi-desert country edged with sandhills. We marvelled at how similar the country was to what we had seen around Lake Mungo, though it was only 97 kilometres away. The country we were travelling had vegetation such as beelia, a type of casuarina growing on the old sand dunes, bladder saltbush on the ancestral lake bed, and mallee along the dune areas. Many of the open plains were treeless and carried saltbush shrubland composed of old man saltbush, bladder saltbush, cottonbush and native grasslands. The diversity of landscape was always changing. The mixture of squalid patches surrounded by saltbush and native grasses made the country interesting, along with the red sand ridges that often appeared along the edge of open plains. I was amazed at the height of some and surprised by how densely covered they were, which reflected the amazing season this area was having. On some of the ridges I was bewildered by the change in the composition of land type. We would be driving up a ridge and on reaching the top there would be sandstone rocks that had yet to be weathered like the rest of the country we had been travelling through. It was an amazing area. Remnants of old fence lines could be seen in places, while in others solar installations used for pumping water. It is always interesting to see the differences between properties, the old and the new methods of farming practice, stocking rates and choice of stock. On reaching Balranald, we checked into a caravan park to catch up on some washing and drying, though the wet weather was not a help. We then went for a drive out to Yanga Woolshed. Yanga Woolshed, at over 100 metres long, is an impressive building. Built in the early 1900s, it had the capacity to shelter over 3,000 sheep, ensuring continuous shearing even in wet weather. The shed originally had 40-blade shearing stands, which were dramatically reduced once mechanised shearing was introduced. The current shed was built after the original was burnt down in 1896 in the midst of a dispute between shearers and pastoralists, and is described as the largest and most modern in the district. Yanga Woolshed houses multimedia interpretive displays describing historical aspects of Yanga Station, riverboat trade, pastoral life in the Western Riverina, the evolution of the lower Murrumbidgee floodplain, Aboriginal history, plus that of the early European explorers who passed through, including John Oxley and Charles Sturt. Rick and I spent time viewing the 4 electronic screens placed throughout the shed, giving us an insight into shearing at Yanga from those who worked there, and reading the extensive interpretation panels located through the shed that provided an insight into the historical aspects of wool production in the Riverina. We also checked out the Murrumbidgee from the huge bend in the river, from where the original wharf loaded wool onto waiting paddle boats. Balranald is located on the western edge of the vast Hay Plain, at a place once used to ford the Murrumbidgee River. Today, it is a service centre for the surrounding irrigation district. Balranald on the Murrumbidgee River is 60 metres above sea level, although it is over 500 kilometres from the mouth of the Murray River at Lake Alexandrina. The town is surrounded by 5 majestic rivers, along with Mungo National Park and the heritage-listed Balranald Lakes that has some of the most unique and spectacular landscapes we had ever seen, which we had visited during our Darling River trip. We were now treated with some more astonishing floodplains and wetlands at Yanga Woolshed, that is just a small part of Yanga National Park. We have been presented with such a varied display of fauna and flora in this outback region of New South Wales. One such thing is the endangered southern bell frog that is found in the area, whose calls are said to resemble a distant motorbike. The 5 rivers on Balranald's doorstep are the Murrumbidgee, Murray, Lockpool, Edward and Lachlan rivers that meander within the Shire. Along the Murrumbidgee is a unique landscape of contrast between black and red country. Vegetation on the black soil floodplains comprises of red river gum forests and swamplands, while on its red soil, vegetation varies from grass to saltbush to woodlands. A large number of migratory birds rely on the Yanga National Park red gum wetlands. These birds include egrets, herons, spoonbills and glossy ibis that use the wetlands as a resting, foraging and breeding ground. Other birds such as the crested greebies, southern boorbooks and sea eagles can also be seen in the area, along with animals like the common ringtail possum, echidnas and kookaburras. On returning to town, we took a walk along the Heritage Trail past the Swinging Bridge and into town. The Balranald Swinging Bridge crosses the Murrumbidgee River, where we walked through strands of red river gums and enjoyed the wildlife including yellow rosellas, kookaburras, kangaroos, emus and the not-so-friendly magpies that were guarding their territory. We sadly did not see any echidnas. Due to the amount of water around, we were unable to follow the walking trail through the wetlands. Along the Heritage Walk, we came across the Southern Bell Frog sculpture cutting a huge log beside the river in Market Street, as well as a trio of frogs outside the Services Club, and Swampy, also known as the Growling Grass Frog, outside the Senior Citizen Centre, which were just a few of the 20 frogs around town to visit. We walked past signposted sites that allowed us to learn about the historic buildings, which included Court Street, the Balranald Wharves, the Australian Joint Stock Bank, built in 1889, and Sturt's Crossing. There were also information about various early explorers, including John Oxley in 1817, Charles Sturt in 1830, and Sir Thomas Mitchell in 1836, who all visited the area, which led to Balranald being gazetted in 1851. I hope you have enjoyed watching this episode. Join us next time as we continue our journey and venture into Victoria for a short visit, and return to Deniliquin and surrounds. Thank you for watching. See you next episode. Cheers, Rick and Rosemary. R&R Living Life.